Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back to another glorious episode of Magnums Rants, the video series where I pick a topic and I sit here and rant and rave and give you my opinion about it. And for today's video, I'm going to have to talk a little bit about my inspiration for this one before we get on to the subject itself. The last video I produced was Ass Effect is No More, BioWare confirms Mass Effect Legendary Edition censored. Surprisingly, got a good number of views. Unfortunately, YouTube decided to remove the fucking thumbnail because, you know, this is YouTube, where they can have ads that feature literal pornography, but me having a picture of a video game character's ass is unacceptable. But that's not what this is about. That's actually another video I'm going to do separately from this one. We'll talk about that later. No. What I want to draw your attention to right now is a little comment I got on that video the day it was produced. And it was by user Yurdonaut Rex. Interesting name, not going to lie. They said, I'm all for that kind of censorship. I used to hate those butt shots myself. Used to download a mod for removing them in the original game. You know, I have to strongly disagree with Mr. Rex here, because personally, I love those butt shots. I thought they were part of the original game's charm, and they were definitely what made me choose Amanda. But that's not the point. I responded to this comment saying, that's fine if you don't like it, but most fans do, and censorship is a slope. Allow one thing to be censored, all things must be censored. This is what we call the slippery slope.
Call me a killjoy, but I think that because this is not to my taste, no one else should be able to enjoy it.
We live in a time where censorship is running rampant. And it's getting worse and worse every single day. Things are being selectively censored. And that's unacceptable because, one, it is against freedom of speech, which is something that I am very heavily an advocate for. But number two, it's something that is only going to continue to get worse unless we stop allowing it entirely. They responded to me once again, saying, it would be cool if it was optional. Your opinion? And while I responded to them directly, that is what prompted me to make this video. I thought about it a little bit, and I wanted to touch on the subject of censorship options in media for the overly sensitive individuals or those that are just not interested in them. So, let's get right into it. Now, the idea of something such as this has been presented multiple times in the past, over the past several years. Ever since 2014, when essentially gamers and gaming started fighting against the social justice and pro-censorship authoritarian menace, back when Gamergate, after the Gamergate incident was a thing. You know, that was a long time ago. What started out as something about having better ethics in the gaming journalism quickly became something much more. It quickly became about the censorship of video games, the people that would demand games censored when they don't even play them, and eventually it inspired people like myself to start rising up and fighting back in the only way we essentially can, and that is by being the voice to the voiceless. As much as that sounds like some social justice rhetoric, you can't deny the fact that gamers have long since been targeted by every form of outlet since the beginning. Ever since the fucking arcade was a thing with the release of the original Mortal Kombat machine. But either way, now we are at a point where so many people are so tired of censorship, they're speaking with their wallet and they're refusing to buy the game because fuck them for censoring it. And you know what? I certain as hell won't be buying it. But a lot of times, what it comes down to is that these social justice, these authoritarian busybodies, these prudes, if you will, that want these things censored in video games, usually rely on the same arguments about think of the children. And it's wrong. It's morally wrong. It's sexist. It's objectification of women. They use these things to push their rhetoric and ever draw forward. And a lot of times, these companies, unfortunately, bend to them, much to the dismay of the wider audience. The wider audience, and people like myself, in the many years that we have been waging this long war of words, one of the things that we've come up with, more or less, is the idea of censorship options. Essentially, adding a system to the options menu to make it so that you can choose to have the game censored. And by doing so, you will be allowing yourself actively, in a sense, to participate in the censorship while leaving the rest of it intact and uncensored for those of us like myself who would rather be able to see all those beautiful, beautiful shots of Amanda's ass. I've pored over this idea quite a handful of times, and while I think that for the most part it would work, I see one major problem with the idea. But we will get into that in a moment. Let's talk about the idea itself. In theory, it would be very easy to make this an option. I mean, they literally have it in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. there's literally an option to censor female nudity to make it so that you can't see nipples. Granted, I have 70 hours in that game, 74 hours. I'm almost to the end of the game. I spent the majority of those hours looking for items and gear pieces because I wanted a specific set, which I regret the time I wasted doing it. I'm not going to lie to you. I wish I would have just progressed the damn game. But either way, the option exists in the game, despite the fact that in my 74 hours of that game, I have not seen a single nipple that wasn't a man's. Which is funny when you consider the fact that the option will only affect women. It would not affect men at all. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. I have it turned off. So the fact that I still haven't seen any tells me that there's probably not any at all. Or, more than likely, there's one scene somewhere that will be long forgotten before I even get to it. It actually kind of annoys me. I would have played as female Ivor if I could run around topless. If it wasn't for the fact that she's just so unlikable and terribly voice acted. Her actress really did a bad job. But anyway, my point remains that these options would be very easy to implement. I mean, they have them in Cyberpunk, for God's sake. A game that lets you literally customize your genitals, and you can choose to have it all censored. Granted, they put that in because they knew the game was going to be huge in the streaming community. And Twitch and YouTube don't allow that kind of thing, so streamers have to censor it. I actually did an uncensored Let's Play of the game. I didn't give a shit. But the point is, the fact that they are able to implement the option at all means it wouldn't be hard to do so in other games like Mass Effect Legendary Edition. Why would it be so difficult to just edit the camera angles and then make it so, hey, you can turn this on if you don't want to stare at Amanda's ass for 64 frames out of 100? It would be very simple, it'd be very easy, and, you know, on the subject of Mass Effect, they had the perfect opportunity here to fix Mass Effect 3's god-awful ending, and they passed it up to focus on butt shots instead. If that isn't blatant censorship, I don't know what is. But then it occurred to me that censorship itself is opposed to the artistic vision, which means even allowing these options would, in a sense, dilute the artistic vision that the creators had in mind and what they were going for. And doing so ultimately is anti-art, which is anti-free speech. As much as I would love these options for the overly sensitive individuals that can't handle a butt shot or two, or some titties in video games, or just don't want to look at that for whatever reason, because reasons, I guess. I've never heard a good example of why you wouldn't want to see titties, but hey, you do you. The problem is that it is still a step down the very slippery slope that's going to eventually, inevitably, quite frankly, turn into a fucking mudslide that's going to take out everything, like it always does. The other thing is that eventually the argument would get started, oh, well, you have the option to censor it, so why not just censor it and not include the option, and make all the sexist incels who want to look at digital titties get mad. Let them be angry, like they always do. And therein lies the problem, is that's what inevitably would happen. The idiots on Twitter, the Anita Sarkeesians, the Zoe Quinns, the Kelfies, they would all eventually just start saying, hey, you allow us to choose to have it censored, so you might as well just censor it. Meanwhile, the rest of us are going to be over here like, no, we don't want it censored. That option was literally only included to get you to shut the fuck up. And then they're going to go, you don't want us to have a voice. Sexism. Oh, I'm so glad my voice is back. That whole month that I wasn't able to do that was fucking annoying. And that's why, in theory, I would be okay with these kinds of options being included. In practice, maybe. Maybe it would work out. Maybe the social justice menace would finally leave us the hell alone. Although I highly doubt it, because it has nothing to do with wanting video games censored. It has to do with wanting control. But, you know. And unfortunately, giving them that option would just mean that they would get what they want. And ultimately, they would turn it into, we need to do more. But maybe for the people that aren't social justice warriors and just don't want to look at a 3D rendered ass for half of a cutscene, of a 5-minute cutscene, you know what? Just to make those people happy, I could see nothing wrong with it. I would see no problem with including these types of options. I just think that ultimately it would end up doing more harm than good, and we would still end up going down the inevitable slippery slope of forced censorship. Times are difficult, ladies and gentlemen. We are in the middle of a lot of problems going on in the world today, and while it might seem like the censorship of video games is very minor by comparison to many of the other things that are going on, they are ultimately just one factor in the many factors that is leading to an authoritarian landscape where freedom of speech is no longer an absolute and is often kicked aside in favor of making the easily offended more comfortable.
Summer, maybe people that create things aren't concerned with your delicate sensibilities, you know? Maybe the species that communicate with each other through the filter of your comfort are less evolved than the ones that just communicate. Maybe your problems are your own to deal with, and maybe the public giving a shit about your feelings is a one-way ticket to extinction. Gee.
But as creators and artists as we are, we must stand up for freedom of speech, and we must continue to fight back against the authoritarian menace. We must continue to not allow them to get away with things. And if the big companies like Electronic Arts and BioWare won't give us what we want, unfortunately we're going to have to either find someone who will and support them instead, or, as much as I'm not an advocate for everyone should make their own, we might have to start making our own. If I had the means to make my own, I certainly would, but I simply don't at this time, and maybe in the future I hope to. But that's pretty much all I have to say about it. Just remember, just because you are offended by something doesn't mean everyone is going to be. You can choose whether or not to consume that content. It is entirely up to your discretion, but you do not reserve the right to tell anyone what they can and cannot say, do, or think, what they can and cannot produce when they are producing it themselves. And even if you run the platform, doing so is a violation of the First Amendment. The First Amendment might, in theory, only apply to the government, but in practice, it should apply to all. If you don't like it, you can choose not to consume it, which is exactly why I am choosing not to consume the censored version of Mass Effect. Thanks for watching, everybody. My name is Magnum Martell, and this has been another beautiful episode of Magnum's Rants. Please leave a like if you enjoyed, or a dislike if you didn't. Let me know down in the comments below what you think of having censorship options in different forms of media to appease the easily offended. And I will see you in the next video.